They all have rabbinic approval.
Yeah, now you have rabbinic approval. Great.
We do.
All right, beautiful. Okay. We are recording. So let's talk about what we're going to do here. And I want you to be with me on this, everybody, and put your seatbelts on a little bit. And what I'd like to do is go for a deep dive into the story of Purim, into Megilat Esther. It's a story that's, we read it twice, of course, right? Very, very difficult to approach. Serena, is that you? Welcome back.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, great to have you back. Mabruk.
Thank you. Thank you.
How are the kids?
Thank God. Thank God. Great.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Thank you.
So, Megilat Esther, right? The story of Esther and Purim. On the surface, it's very hard to connect to it. There's very little written, there's very little expressed. It's very topical, it's very surface. And that begs a real deep dive. And that's why we're going to dedicate a handful of weeks to really get inside it and own it. Because it's the story of not only what happened way back when, in the time of Mordechai and Esther, 70 plus or minus years after the destruction of the first temple, but it's the ongoing story of the diaspora. It's breathtaking, it's deep, it's broad, it's exciting, it's challenging. And when you read it on the surface, it's hard to get any of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go way up, 20,000 square feet, 20,000 feet, so to speak. We're going to look at it from there. We're going to do it on a pshat level, meaning the language of what's written in the verse, and we're going to do it on a midrashic, meaning a philosophical, Kabbalistic level. We're going to do both, okay? We're going to do both. I believe will provide us something very, very special and unique. We're going to work with the Gra, one of the greatest commentators of all time. I'll explain more about him probably next time as we go into it. We're going to work with the Malbim as well. And we're going to build this world, God willing, of understanding both on the literal approach to the verses and the broad and the wide approach. Good? Okay? Now, caveat is that I want you to own it. So if there's stuff that's not working, like we do in our in-person class, God willing, we'll be back to that next week. Stop, challenge, let's work it. Okay, good. So
do we need any text or anything for today?
You could no. Truth, we're going to do an overview today. We're going to do an introduction, so you don't need it today. Next week we'll start with it. Okay, so we know in general terms, right? We know in general terms that there are 24 books in the canon, right? In the Tanakh, 24 books. 5 books are the written Torah, what Hashem gave to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? 5 books of the written Torah, and then another 19 books, many of which are prophecy, books on prophecy. And then we have the other special writings, the writings on the story of Ruth and Shavuot, the writings on Esther and Mordechai and the story of Purim. We have some of the writings of King Solomon. We have the writing of King David. So we call those Ketuvim, right? Those are the add-on, the end of this beautiful 24-book composite of what we hold to be our overall roadmap of getting closer to God, of understanding the world, and so on. Many of you are familiar that ultimately, after in the latter part of the time of Mashiach, when the Messiah comes, right? Most of those 24 books will be shelved, will no longer be taught. In fact, our rabbis write that of the 24, we'll keep the 5 written books, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, right? What we call the Chumash. And we're going to keep the book of Esther, Megilat Esther, as top priority, and everything else will either be mothballed, put into the Genizah, put into a holy storage place, or will be put on the shelf and not read much, which is kind of remarkable. We've been talking about why, and we're going to understand why as we go. But start with the premise that we have 24 books in the canon. Of the 24 books, 6 will move into that eternal phase of Jewish existence and world existence. The 5 core books that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to us directly, and this one book of the story of Purim. A. B. We also know, and it's just a reminder, that when the Mashiach comes and we move forward in that process, most of the holidays that are biblical holidays will be downgraded or disappear. And the holidays that will stay are Purim and Hanukkah. Therefore, what we're talking about here is a message that transcends everything we will ever experience in the regular world and remains relevant in this supercharged world. So whatever is written in this Megillah is not only the message for today and yesterday and many tomorrows, but it's the message even when we're in an altogether new reality where Mashiach has come, there's a new world order, it's much easier to access God. We're going to talk about all these things. This book will still be paramount and relevant. So let's start with that premise, okay? Now, I want you to picture the following in your minds, right? I want you to picture, hi Mazal, how are you? I want you to picture a V, okay? And the V works as follows, and stop me if this is not clear. I'm going to give you the Hebrew terms, and then we're going to talk about it in English. It's Moach, Dibur, Yad, Dibur, Moach. It's thought on the top of the V. We go down to speech, go down to action. We come back up to speech, and then we come back up to thought. So let's do it again. Those of you who have a pen, put a V. On the top of either point of the V, we have thought or moach. Step down to the middle of the V on either side, we have words, and go to the bottom and we have action. Okay, so what we hold is as follows, and please stop me if it's not clear. We hold the following. When the world started, communication with God and with others was through thought only. Moach, top of the V. As things didn't go so well in the Garden of Eden, and then we ultimately leave the Garden of Eden, we go to a lesser level of communication with God and each other, and that's called speech. As things get less good, and we're not really pulling it off as well as we can, we step down one more step to action. So today, for example, we use speech, we pray, we study, right? A lot of speech, and we do a lot of mitzvot, which is action. So started up here with thought, took a step down to words, took a step down to action. As the time of Mashiach gets closer, we will step back up to where language becomes much more front and center, much more powerful in defining how we live. And then ultimately, in the time of Mashiach, communication will be through thought only. Good? Everybody cool with that? Okay, so we will thoughtfully reach out to each other. We won't speak with words, we'll speak with thoughts. And our thoughts will communicate what's going on. Okay, everything will be transparent, right? Because everybody will be able to sort of see into each other's heads, right? Kind of thing. So, huh?
That's dangerous.
Yeah, now it is, right. So thought will carry the day. Good? Good. Now, stay there, okay? Stay there with me. I have my V. Good. Now, next step. We say that the books of the prophets where God downloaded to people, men and women, great men and women, where God spoke to them and they then spoke it over to us, those books will ultimately be cast aside, right? Those books will be cast aside. And what book will emerge and stay? The books that came from us, the books that were written by us, the books that were done with our thoughts, not the stuff that was downloaded, but the stuff that we developed. So effectively, what the human being developed based on the core tenets of God are what remains forever. And what the human being simply downloaded, well, that gets chucked. Let's do it again. If you had to choose later on in time, right? You had to choose. What does Al Sheikh HaKadosh say? One of the greatest Kabbalists of all time. He says that all of what the prophets said, we will be able to discover ourselves in the written Torah, because our minds will have grown to that level. Right? Remember, moach, thought. And I don't need the prophets to tell me stuff anymore, because I'm going to be able to figure it out myself. Okay with that? Anybody else okay with it? I'm trying to get some cues from Jamie if she knows what I'm talking about.
Yes, it
Anybody?
makes sense. It makes sense.
Okay. All right. Appreciate it. Okay, good. So what happens here? We have the phrase Chacham Adif Minavi. We talked about it in one of the other classes. Mazal tagged it. Chacham Adif Minavi. Remember, we touched on it in the last week or two, right? So what does that mean? It means the person, he or she, who develops his or her mind to a very high level is preferred to the prophet, because the prophet is just parroting what was said to him or her. But the Chacham, the wise person, is developing the ideas on his own. So if we're going from a point of thought being paramount to thought being paramount, that works. And what does the Al Sheikh HaKadosh say? He says that at the end of time, we, because our minds will have grown to a very high level, will be able to understand all the prophets said, all the prophets hinted. And what will remain? What books will remain? It's incredible. What books will remain? All the Torah Shebe'al Peh, all the oral law books that men developed and women developed, those will stay. But all the books of the prophets will not. Yeah.
You said the 6 books were the Humashim and the Esther. That's not
Right. Those. Right. Good. So we're gonna, in the canon of the 24, we'll have 6 plus what people wrote. Right. What David wrote and Shlomo wrote and so on. Right. Okay. We'll have that. Good. But in terms of what we will look at as Torah at that time, will be all of the oral law. Where does the oral law come from? It came from people. Therefore, it's all about the people. It's all about what we develop. And the ultimate sharing with God is going to be his core, of course, his core Torah, and all of our interpretations, and all of the oral Torah, and all of these books, right? These are all man-written, and thousands more, but that's where it's going to be. So, if that's true, that at the end of time, the books of the prophets will be put aside, and the books of the Chacham, of the men and women who develop exciting ideas, which we call Torah Shebe'al Peh, or the oral law, those will remain paramount. Then that is our blueprint. Okay, so if start with thought and end with thought, the thought that I end with is our thought. It's not God imposing his thought. It's God kickstarting it and man developing it. That's what it is. Okay? Okay with that? Beautiful. So far, so good? Serene, you okay?
Yes.
I see two people. So I see two plus Jamie. So you're the people that I'm going to be talking to.
Okay.
That's it. That's all I got. Okay, are we all okay with this so far? Okay, cool. Now, if that's true, and the Megillah will survive, what does that tell you about the Megillah? If that's true, that it's all about what we develop, and the Megillah is one of those things that will stay, so what does it tell you about the story of Esther and Mordechai?
From the people.
It's
From the people.
It's from the people. It's from the people. And it tells you that what was written down is very, very limited. And we have a massive amount of liberty to look into it and to develop it, because what we develop, and as we develop it, that is its truth. So, what is the Megillah telling you, being so obscure, never mentioning God's name once, never mentioning the land of Israel once? Imagine, it's the only book in the entire canon that never mentions God's name once. It's the only book in the entire canon that never mentions the land of Israel. It's crazy. And this is the book we're going to keep? How's that possible? You know why it's possible? Because the hints and the urge and the pushes and the obscurities and the things within things are there for us to discover. And if the name of God is not overtly written there, it's for us to discover it, to identify it, and to build it. And that's why it's so powerful. Still with me? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. Therefore, we'll say one other thing on this. We say that the book of Esther, the Megillah, was written Ruach HaKodesh. What does it mean? We've touched on this in our classes. What does it mean, Ruach HaKodesh? Anybody remember? Ruach HaKodesh, what it means? Anybody remember? Ruach HaKodesh means that it's not prophecy, what God is downloading to us. It's where a person has grown so much intellectually that he or she can access knowledge on a higher level. So in fact, when we say that it was written B'Ruach HaKodesh with a divine spirit, it's not to denigrate it, it's to elevate it. So if we said it was prophetic, it would be an absolute download, and it would be passé at a certain period of time. But if we say that it's a combination of man's intellectual prowess and God's hints and pushing and pulling, well, now it's on the highest level possible. And it all comes together. What we're looking at here is a work, we're looking at a work, right? A written work that is a massive human element that builds massively on a limited heavenly revelation that becomes the eternal book. And the reason it becomes the eternal book is because it mimics the eternal ideal of God starting and putting in a limited amount, so to speak, and not putting in a massive amount to fill it all in and finish it. Yes, Rin.
So when something is interpreted with Ruach HaKodesh, are you allowed to have like an oral law commentary on it, or even with the Nibuah? Like, are you allowed
Fantastic. Of course. And what do we treasure We treasure the commentary more than we treasure the prophecy. So therefore, I want to show you something. Therefore, I'll show you. So in this book, this is one of the books that is published. It's a fantastic book that's published on Megilat Ruth and so on. And there are many commentaries in it, many commentaries. And this is only one of the books with all the commentaries. So we want the commentaries. We want the expansive thinking, because the expansive thinking is our gateway to God. It's our gateway to understanding. So this pointedly was not given prophetically. It was pointedly written with the intellectual prowess of Mordechai and Esther to tell us that this is where we want it to be. This is the ideal. And Ruach HaKodesh, divine spirit, is more eternal than prophecy is, and more valuable, because it fully engages man actively, not passively. And the oral law is the greatest contribution to it all. And what does the oral law suggest? All kinds of different opinions, and that's great. Okay, so far?
Yes, thank you.
We're okay with that? Okay, fine. Okay, therefore we
Okay.
say, yeah,
Yeah, I'm making some cup of tea.
Mazal, you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, great.
Ricky, Ricky,
Yeah,
who wrote Megilat Esther?
who wrote it? Which- Who wrote it? Yeah, Mordechai and Esther wrote it.
Okay, thank you.
Beautiful. Okay, beautiful. Now, just to tie this back to one or two other points, and then we'll move on. We call the month of Adar, from a midrashic Kabbalistic perspective, we call it the month of Moach Chochmah. The month of Moach Chochmah, which means it's the month when the mind has wisdom, which means that this is the month when the mind can access a great level of wisdom. So it's called Chodesh Moach Chochmah. This is the month when a person can use his or her intellect to connect with a great level of wisdom, because the access is easier. Okay, good. Next, we say that the acceptance of the Torah. Keep everything in mind what we just said. We say the acceptance of the Torah in the time of Purim was a much greater acceptance than was the acceptance at Mount Sinai. Again, the acceptance of the Torah on Purim was a much greater acceptance than at Mount Sinai. Now let's see. Mount Sinai, you had hundreds of thousands of men, millions of people. You had remarkable miracles. You had God's voice speaking directly to the people. You're coming off of the Makot, the plagues in Egypt, which were remarkable. The splitting of the sea, which was remarkable. Bread coming out of the sky, water coming out of rocks, birds parking themselves so they could be eaten. All of these remarkable things. And we say that pales in contrast to the acceptance of the Jewish people then of the Torah is less great in contrast to when we accepted it for Purim. Why would that be?
We did it willingly. We did it willingly now.
We did it
We had no
willingly.
choice.
Good.
We had no choice before. Like before, we sort of didn't have a choice, and we saw Hashem's open miracles. Now we don't even see Hashem, and we accept it
Fantastic.
by choice.
So go a little bit further. I want you to own the term here. Then we were anusim. Anus means, to your point, Serene, Aleph Nun Vav Samech. Anus means that we were overwhelmed. We didn't have a choice. To your point exactly. We had seen so much, and it was such a shock and awe that we couldn't not accept the Torah. We couldn't not accept it, right? Now, so we say that we were anusim then, and that's why we have the midrash, we have the parable that says that kafa alehem har kegigit, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu took Mount Sinai, broke it off, held it above them, and he said, accept the Torah here, or this will be your burial place, right? Of course, that didn't happen, but it essentially happened because there was no way not to accept it. We were so overwhelmed by it. What happens in Purim? Absolutely nothing. It's the beautiful princess in the palace saves the day. Could that have been ignored? 1,000,000%. 1,000,000%. And the Megillah shouts that the chances of ignoring it were massive because we're not even thinking about God in this generation. We're not even thinking about Israel in this generation. So we were so detached that the chances of ignoring it and missing this thing were massive. Therefore, we say that when it says kiyamu v'kiblu, that they kept and they accepted at the end of the Megillah, 1,000 years more or less after standing at Mount Sinai, that was the time when we truly accepted the Torah, because we weren't overwhelmed, and we weren't anusim, we had our own thought process, our own ability to reason, and we accepted it. And that ties us right back to men and women using their minds to reach out to God and connect to God. Good? So that's our kiyamu v'kiblu. Okay, good. Let's touch on another piece of that. So we know, good, we're okay so far? Yeah? Okay, so good. It's hard to do the Zoom thing. But, okay, great. Okay. We also hold that, after the incident with Mei Merivah with the bitter waters and so on, right before Amalek comes, and we've touched on this before, some of you might remember, right before Amalek comes on the scene, our eternal enemy comes on the scene. There's a language in the verse which is very curious. It sounds like an editor speaking, and it says, "Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im ayin." Is God within us? Is He inside of us or not? Is God within us? Is He inside of us or not? Now that's very curious. We don't understand what it said. We know the Jewish people were complaining a lot at that point. God becomes frustrated with them. But to bring this phrase out, and the phrase is immediately followed by Vayavo Amalek. And Amalek comes on the scene with no reason whatsoever and nothing to gain whatsoever. He comes on the scene and he attacks us. So, try to connect back to what we said. Keep in mind that Haman was a direct descendant of Amalek, that Haman's job and mantra was to do the job of his great-grandpa Amalek. That's what he was there to do. But also note that Amalek was brought on the scene by us. It says, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im ayin, is God dwelling inside of us or not? And it appears that God was not dwelling inside of us, and therefore Amalek comes on the scene. So, what does that tell you about Purim? What does it tell you about Purim? Go back
Seems
to
like it's like a rectification of what happened previously.
Fantastic. Fantastic. It's copy paste. It's redo. That's exactly right. So therefore, when we're studying the Megillah, when we're looking at it, we have to look at it as Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im ayin. Now, to say that the sin of the Jewish people is that they went to Achashverosh's party, I mean, it's almost silly to say something like that because the punishment has to fit the crime. And going to a party doesn't bring, lo alenu, doesn't bring destruction, absolute utter destruction. It doesn't.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
But the story of Purim, when they accepted the Torah willingly here now, right? More than that Har Sinai, that was because of the story of Purim, or prior to it, they had already accepted it fully.
Excellent. It was because of the story of Purim. It's at the end of the Megillah. Very good.
Okay.
Very good. So, if the onset of Amalek, of our eternal enemy, the enemy that wants to destroy us completely, no, this is different from the Hanukkah story. The Hanukkah story, they wanted to wipe out the Torah. They wanted to wipe out the Torah. They didn't want to wipe us out. Okay, from our perspective, it's one and the same. They're each the worst thing possible, but they didn't want to destroy us physically. Over here, Ahashverosh and Haman, then wanted to destroy us physically, completely, wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. Therefore, it's different. It's a different threat, and it was a different punishment, which thank God didn't take place. But if we understand that Haman is Amalek, that we created Amalek the first time, we created Amalek the second time, it pushes us further to try and figure out what was going on there. And it couldn't have been that what was going on was that we went to a party, even if the wine was unkosher, even if they were bringing the utensils of the Beit HaMikdash, which may have all have been true, and we're going to look at that in detail, but clearly that doesn't bring an absolute extinction. The punishment of destroying every man, woman, and child doesn't make any sense. Therefore, we have to say that something much, much greater happened. Something incredibly, massively tragic and traumatic to the Jewish people that brought this response from God. Because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. Good?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
But when Mashiach comes, we're not reading the story to really say that, oh, it's a cautionary tale that could happen again, because when Mashiach came, it's just really like a story about our history of how we got to Mashiach.
This is a story of the Purim story, you're saying?
Yeah. Like I'm saying, when we
Purim?
read it during Mashiach, it's not really like a warning of don't do this again, is it? Because we're not going to ever get.
What it is it's what we need perpetually throughout time, forever, even in the post-Mashiach time. It's what we need to continue to build to be very close to God. So anything we needed to get to Mashiach, i.e. the 15 or so books of the prophets, we did it. We pulled it off by then, and therefore they're not relevant anymore, or much less relevant. But what we'll read and understand in this book, God willing, the level we hope to do it at, is what we need to stay with even after Mashiach comes.
Right, but Hashem's not missing any, like it's not really so relevant because he's not really missing anymore. He's very available and very, very obvious. So it's not really it's not the same.
It's not the same.
It sounds like it's more for us, like it's a recommitment story. It's a story of recommitment.
Right.
It is a recommitment story. So now we have to understand where the distance developed, and how that distance, to your point, Serene, how that distance can even happen in the post-Mashiach time. Because to your point, if it couldn't happen again then there'd be no point to continuing to read it, right? What we understand is that what Yirmiyah taught us, and Yeshaya and Shmuel and the later prophets taught us, we will have worked all those things through and therefore brought Mashiach. So to your point, those become almost irrelevant. But this, and we have to understand what this is, will remain a mandate, a must, an imperative for us forever, even after we've reached this high level of connectedness post-Mashiach.
Got it.
Beautiful. Okay, excellent. Okay. So when we say, Ha'im yesh Hashem b'kirbenu im ayin, I want you to, is God within us or not? I want you to hold this term paramount in your minds, because it's a term that we're going to have to revisit on many levels and try and understand on many levels, because, the reason that we celebrate Purim is to grow and to understand the core messages and to become better with them. Just a something to begin to think about in terms of Hayesh Hashem b'Kibenu im Ayin, is God within us or not, is this notion of being consumed by, is this notion of being consumed by the relationship with God. Is a person consumed with his relationship? We don't know what that word means. It's a big term and it's hard to understand, but we will explain it as we go.
Is it a positive term or negative term?
It's, Jamie's asking, is it a positive term or a negative term? And the answer is, it is the most positive term. I'll give you a little hint. It's, when you say, it's a difference between doing for someone and doing for someone out of love. Very different. It's a difference between loving a person and being in love with the person. Very big difference. You can love a person, great. But if you're in love with a person, it's altogether different. That kind of thing. It's when we say Hayesh Hashem b'Kibenu im Ayin, what we're touching on, and we're going to talk about it much more deeply, but just to think about it briefly at this point and to have it in your minds, we're talking about being consumed with God and being in that place on an almost ongoing basis, and therefore creating a new reality.
That reality is not, when Mashiach comes, is not that reality.
So that reality is something that we want to be grabbing now. And that reality is something that can be achieved now to a great extent, not to the fullest extent to your point, because now we're back in the middle of the V, right? We went down and now we came back up. Now we're in the middle of the V. We're back in Dibur or language. We're not far from thought again, where we went thought, language, or thought, words, action. We're back up in the word place now, which means we've made massive progress and we'll continue to. And we're beginning to grab that highest point. So what we say is that we can achieve that now. We can be consumed by the relationship, enthralled with the relationship. And that creates a different reality today and begets that ultimate different reality, that ultimate reality. I want to just touch on a point on that today. For example, we have this Moach thing, and I've said this before, so I apologize for those who've heard it already. It's the Moach, the connecting by thought, is starting to happen now. We're starting to see it in the post-Shoah state of Israel time period in small things like when you go to the land of Israel, you feel this crazy connectedness to strangers. Doesn't make any sense. How can I feel a level of closeness? Why do I want to hug the soldier or the taxi driver or the falafel stand vendor? Why? Does that make any sense? Never saw this person before. But over there, you're in a hypercharged reality where they're probably closer to Moach, to thought, than we are. And therefore, where the connections are done without words, they're internal, they're spiritual. And that will become more and more the case. So to your point, Rachel, we can be there now, to some extent, and us being there now through the moach, through the mind and the thought and raising the intellect will bring that period along to us. Good. Okay, let's touch on a couple of specifics. Okay, so far, any questions? Everybody still okay? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So Vahi b'mei Hashverosh wa Hashverosh. Just a few of the tip-off points for when we get into the book. So we touched a few weeks ago on the idea that when the term who, he, said, he is X. We talked about it in the context of Moshe. Now the Havdil, to separate from the greatest to the worst, we're going to talk about it in the context of when the word who, which means he, which is totally extra word, unnecessary word, is found in the text. It means that the person was groomed for X. So when we see that who Moshe, for example, or Moshehu, it means that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, was groomed, was primed, was built to lead the Jewish people. So, as we've said before, there is no absolute free choice. There's no such thing as absolute free choice. Nobody has absolute free choice. We have somewhat free choice. And we have been honed and built and developed to carry out certain things in the world. We may or may not do it, but we've been tooled and groomed to do it. Moshe Rabbeinu was groomed to be the greatest teacher of all time to the Jewish people. And Ahashverosh was groomed to bring about this catastrophic event that would cause a massive change within the Jewish people. So when you read about Ahashverosh, you're not talking about a specific person. You're talking about the prototypical person that, God forbid, will be brought against us from time to make us move from point A to point B. Ahashverosh is not a one-time guy. Ahashverosh is an absolute destroyer, a descendant of Amalek, who comes on the scene because of our struggling and our stumbling. And he's a paradigm, it doesn't matter. He's a paradigm to other people like him. So when you're thinking about Ahashverosh, don't think about him per se. Just think about this type of person or army or country or philosophy or ideology that might come after the Jewish people. As we mentioned, the word God is never mentioned here. The only one who references God is the wife of Haman, of all people. She's the only one who references God in the whole book. One other thing a couple other things that should be noted are, before we open the book, are the term Shushan Habira, Shushan the capital, right? So the Hey, which stands for the capital, the only other time it's used in the whole 24 books of the canon is in reference to Jerusalem. So the fact that it's used here in reference to a place far from Jerusalem also starts to give us an indication of where people were and what they were thinking. So keep in mind, Ahashverosh is not a person, he's a personality. He's the extension of Amalek. Habira, the capital, is to tell you where the Jewish people were at the time. The party that goes on is not meant to describe a party per se. The party that goes on, which was 7 days and then 180 days, and we'll talk about this in detail next time. The party that goes on for 7 days and then 180 days is meant to describe an effort to go right at the core components of God's connection to the world. The first 7-day party, in quotation marks, the first 7-day party is meant to challenge God's creation of the world and was therefore placed in a 7-day context. The 180-day party is meant to challenge God's involvement in the world, and we'll talk about why that happened for 180 days as well. The fact that we believe that Ahashverosh wore the clothing of the high priest of Aharon and bought the utensils of the Bet HaMikdash in has massive implications. We're going to talk about that as well. I just want to think of what else would serve as a good introduction for today.
Wait, so then let me ask you, when you said Habira, you said it references Jerusalem. Is that a good thing? Their state of mind was good or not good?
Actually, not good because they replaced Jerusalem with Shushan.
Okay.
So we're calling Shushan our capital. Good. Mordechai HaYehudi, few other just touch points for today. When we see the term, when Mordechai is introduced to us as Mordechai HaYehudi, Mordechai the Jew.
If there weren't too many other good Jews in.
Right, very curious, right? Mordechai the Jew is the only Jew. There were millions of people living in the Babylonian Empire at the time. Mordechai the Jew, nobody else. And the term Jew is used for him exclusively and nobody else. That's telling. There's a perspective of our rabbis that says as follows, and I want you to have it in your minds also as part of the overview and introduction, that none of the problem with Ahasuerus or Haman would have happened unless Mordechai instigated it. None of the problem, it's not true, but I want you to think that it is true for a minute, because we should think that it is true. When did Haman get really, really angry? At what point did he get really angry?
When he thought Mordecai was replacing him.
When Mordechai wouldn't bow down to him, right? Why? Because the law is that the king and his viceroys should be bowed down to, right? And what's the halacha on that? Are you allowed to bow down to the king or a viceroy, a non-Jewish king or a viceroy? The answer is you are, because that's a show of respect. It's not a show of idol worship. Therefore, could Mordechai HaYehudi, Mordechai the Jew, have bowed down to Ahasuerus and Haman? Of course he could have. Would he have been totally within the realm of Jewish law had he done so? 100%. He chooses not to. He chooses to stoke the coals. He chooses to rev things up. Some people say, and we're going to go into it much more deeply and broadly, but I want you to have it in your mind. Some people say he manufactures the crisis. Why would he do that?
Move things along.
To bring it about.
Bring it about, right? Good. So had he not created the crisis, we may have continued on the road that we were and disappeared. I'm talking about what that road was, but we're not disappeared. So it might really be that Mordechai himself creates the crisis. And one of the things to think about, I'm going to talk about when with the book open, God willing, next time, is when Mordechai's lineage is recounted, it's very edited. It's very limited. There are many, many, many people that were noteworthy people that were the parent, grandparent, great, 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 great grandparents of Mordechai Yehudi, but we only mention about 4 of them, rather than 10 or 12 that could have been mentioned. And if we're positing Mordechai as the guy, as the true Jew, and maybe we're positing him as the one who saw what was happening and risks everything to tear down, to literally tear things down to an absolute extreme extent, we need to note why certain of his forefathers were mentioned and others not. So we'll touch on that as well. I want to touch on one final point in terms of Esther. Esther is a spectacular figure. What's her real name? Anybody remember? You're going to know this cold in a couple of weeks. You're going to be, huh? What is it? Hadassah, right? The myrtle. Hadassah, right? The Hadassah is what is not unique, but what is noteworthy about the myrtle plant? No,
No taste or smell, I think, right?
Huh? It's what?
Does it not have a taste or smell or something? What?
I'm not sure, but it's always ripe. It's always
Oh.
ripe. Okay, it may not, it may or may not, I'm not sure, but it's always ripe. It's always green, 12 months a year. So we called Esther's real name was Hadassah, right? Good. Maybe. I don't know if that's where the hospital comes from. I'm not sure, but that's her real name. Now, why do we call her Esther? Why do we call her Esther?
They're like.
She hid her identity. Did she hide her identity?
She hid her identity. Excellent. And what else is, who else's identity is hidden?
God.
Beautiful, fantastic. When is God's identity hidden?
The whole story, no?
Beautiful. His identity is hidden in the whole story, right? So where do we get that from? We get that, and we'll look at the pasuk specifically next time. We get that from a pasuk in the Chumash, which says that there will be a period in time when the Jewish people don't sin, and as a result of that, will be thrown out of the land of Israel. And as a result of that, in the diaspora, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will hide himself. So imagine what's going on here. 70 years after the destruction. Previous to the 70 years, we had all the miracles in Egypt, the miracles leaving Egypt, the splitting of the sea, Ma'amad Har Sinai, standing in front of Mount Sinai, accepting the Torah. Then we have almost 1,000 years of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the first temple. Almost 1,000 years living full blast in the land of Israel, bringing sacrifices, having the tabernacle, having the Beit HaMikdash. Everything is destroyed. La'alenu was sent out. And now we have this thing lingering in our minds that when we're sent out, God says it's going to be hard to find me. That I'm not going to show myself so overtly anymore. I was very overt on the Temple Mount. You saw me all the time. I'm not going to show myself so overtly anymore. You're going to have to find me. And who finds him? Our Esther, right? So we're going to look at how hidden, right? The lady who really has this incredible resilience, who's resilient all the time, right? Hadassah is her given name, right? No names, all these names are, for a purpose. She has to take on this hasarat panim, this hiding. She has to team up with God, sort of, in him hiding his revelation to us in order to blow this thing wide open, to create an idea and a roadmap that they used then to save themselves, that we will use again and again to save ourselves until the time of Mashiach and beyond. So our Esther, who's really Hadassah, was given that name to make us reminded of the fact that God was deliberately hiding himself during this period. So not only were the Jewish people doing whatever, which brought upon them this potentially catastrophic issue, but the one who's going to save us is the one who's going to do it in this very hidden, very subliminal way, which is the most profound thing that can happen to us, the most important thing that can happen to us, which will give us an insight on how each of us should live our lives every day, forever and ever and ever, and how we as a Jewish people should conduct ourselves. And that's it. That's the intro. That is the intro. After
Great
this, it's all uphill after this.
Nice intro.
All right. Thoughts, questions? Okay. Yeah.
Good. Excited.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky.
Beautiful
Thank you
crowd
so much.
today.
Oh, wait, can you clarify one thing?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. I didn't realize I was on mute. I was talking. So why do we need the Megilat Esther when Mashiach comes? Did you answer that? Because I think I didn't understand that.
No, I didn't answer it. Serena asked a question, I didn't answer it. What I also asked a question, and I told her that as we understand all the points in it, then we'll see that. Yes,
Oh, okay.
but that's a massive question. It's a massive question because if we needed to get us to Mashiach, we're there. But now you're telling me we're in the Moach stage, we're in the stage of communication through thought, the highest level of existence, and we still need it? The answer is yes. So that's what we're going to talk about.
So it represents more than a recommitment.
Fantastic. That's right. It's
Okay,
going to take
okay.
us there, and it's going to continue to move us. Exactly. Great.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you all. Appreciate it very
Very-
much. Thank you. God willing, we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.